Hi, it's Katrina. Number 10. Giant Ancient Bull. Here's something you've probably never heard of before. In October of 1966, archaeologists with the Regional Museum of Ica in Peru uncovered an incredibly massive container that looked like a giant egg. Larger than a person, it turned out to be an enormous clay vessel meant to hold grains 2,400 years ago. The bowl measured about 6 feet wide in diameter and was just over 9 feet tall. Inside the giant vessel, archaeologists found a variety of seeds, from beans, yucca, and guava. But here's where things get a little strange. Making a container that big thousands of years ago couldn't have been easy. It's not even easy now. The giant clay pot would have had to be made in a pretty advanced workshop. Archaeologists haven't found any such place in the general area. They believe the giant clay pot was transported from far away. But how and why? The clay pot was found in the Ica region of Peru, close to the Nazca Lines and the Paracas skulls. But even with all of this information, scientists still don't know exactly which culture was responsible for making such a giant pot. For that matter, archaeologists aren't even sure why it was so enormous. Someone definitely used it to store food, but why did they need something so big? It's much more practical to store food in smaller containers that can be filled and moved more easily. The only theory researchers have is that the ancient Peruvians believed that by filling the giant clay vessel with enough food and burying it underground, it could preserve more food for longer. Remember, these people were much more knowledgeable and advanced than we give them credit for. Number 9. Water on Mars. Astronomers have made a very strange discovery on the red planet. Observations have led to the suggestion that liquid water was flowing on Mars as recently as 2 billion years ago. That was before life on Earth began, but still fairly recent in the galactic timeline of the universe. Scientists use data from NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter to identify chloride salt deposits left behind by flowing water. After studying dozens of images of these salt deposits, scientists were able to date when they were made. Instead of water being on Mars 3 billion years ago, now it was still flowing 2 billion years ago. What makes this so mysterious is that if water had been flowing for so long on the surface of the planet, it could easily have hosted life for much of its geological history. That said, we still don't know what kind of life may have been living on Mars, just when exactly that life went extinct, or where we're going to find proof of it. The good news is that it now appears water was present for long enough on the planet's surface to potentially have spawned some form of life. Scientists still believe there is an underground reservoir beneath the surface of the South Pole where liquid water could still be trapped. Number 8. Mysterious Ancient Geometry Tablet. The oldest known example of applied geometry is a clay tablet that dates back to 3,700 years ago. It was created in Babylon and is the only example we have today of a cadastral document. That's a fancy term for a land survey map, once used to define property lines. In other words, someone in old Babylon used geometry in the real world to mark the boundaries of a certain piece of property. The tablet shows highly advanced knowledge of right angles and triangles, a knowledge that wasn't seen again for over 1,000 years. Not until the Greek mathematician Pythagoras came up with his famous theorem, the one we still learn in high school today. The clay tablet is called Psi 427. The mystery behind it is that archaeologists don't know how the ancient Babylonian civilization became so mathematically sophisticated. It shows they obviously had a deep understanding of trigonometry, and yet this knowledge appears to have been lost with them until the Greeks learned it themselves much later. Where did they get the knowledge, and why wasn't it passed on to other civilizations after the fall of Babylon? Number 7. A wolfish mutation. Scientists have recently discovered a rare mutation in wolves from over 50,000 years ago. This mutation can be found today in very small-sized dogs like Chihuahuas and Pomeranians. Whereas most people believe humans are solely responsible for breeding miniature canines, that's actually not the case. The mutation behind incredibly tiny dogs goes back way before humans ever started breeding anything. The mutation was found in the growth factor 1 gene as part of a study done by the National Institutes of Health Dog Genome Project. The gene was found in tiny dogs alive today, as well as from fossils of Siberian wolves that lived 54,000 years ago. In fact, the gene can be found in every canid species living today. This includes coyotes, jackals, and domesticated dogs. Elaine Ostrander, a geneticist working on the project, said it's as if nature kept the gene tucked away in her back pocket until humans started utilizing it. In other words, the gene was always there to turn giant wolves into tiny Chihuahuas, but humans began playing around with breeding and were the ones to unlock it. Number 6. Mysterious Celtic Sword. While surveying the site of an ancient Celtic village near the town of Crudym in East Bohemia, archaeologists stumbled upon a small trove of mysterious artifacts. Included among the artifacts was a sword dating back to the 2nd century BC. It's 2,000 years old, likely once wielded by a Celtic warrior of some renown. Almost as fascinating as the sword is just how the unexpected discovery was made. According to archaeologist David Vitch, the field in which they uncovered the treasure had recently been plowed. This created a unique opportunity to scan the entire field with metal detectors and easily pull out any iron artifacts. It almost seems like just beneath the surface of almost every field in Europe is some ancient trove of treasure waiting to be discovered. Aside from the sword, they also found arrow spikes and pieces of buckles. The sword was almost definitely fashioned by an early Celtic blacksmith. It's sharp on both sides for slashing left and right. Its tip is blunt and there is a rib in the middle of the blade. The handle of the sword was most likely made from leather, but has already decayed. The sword is in pretty rough shape, bent in form and curved. When it was first made, however, it would have been a truly remarkable weapon. As for why it was found in the field, that's a bit of a mystery. The Celts did start out by burying their dead with grave goods to help prepare them for the afterlife. But in the later years, when this sword was used, the Celts had started burning their dead. There is a huge gap in the archaeological record because the Celts simply burned everything and left no trace behind. This sword may have been lost or even left behind after a great battle. Number 5. Beaver Throwing Darts. Scientists with the Canadian Conservation Institute recently discovered a throwing dart 6,000 years old. But stranger than that is that it was made from beaver secretion. It's the earliest use ever documented of humans using castoreum in the making of a weapon. Castoreum is a product that only comes from the anal sac of beavers. The dart, known as an ancient atlatl, was found near Alligator Lake in the Yukon, which is near the border of Canada and Alaska. It was found in the melting alpine ice where two groups of indigenous people once lived, the Carcross Tagish and the Kwanlin Dun. These ancient people were mainly hunters who stayed in the region because of the abundance of caribou and sheep. In recent years, as the ice has continued to melt, more and more interesting indigenous artifacts have been found, from tools to weapons. The dart is a lot bigger than you probably think. It was almost 7 feet long, made out of birch wood. At one end was a point fixed to the wood with sinew wrappings. The other end was adorned with feathers. The ancient indigenous people would have used it for hunting big game. As for the beaver secretion, it was used as an adhesive to keep all of the different pieces in place. It was basically used as super glue to keep the point, the feathers, and the 3 sections of the dart strong and sturdy. The real mystery here is how in the world the indigenous people figured out that by milking the anal gland of a beaver, they could get an adhesive. The discovery process must have been extremely bizarre. Number 4. Lost Oxford College. New excavations in Oxford have unveiled the site of a mysterious lost college from medieval days that hasn't been seen since the middle of the 16th century. It's called St. Mary's College, and it was originally founded in 1435. However, within just 100 years, it had fallen into a state of disrepair and was unusable. It then vanished from all historical records and was assumed destroyed. Only now, the college limestone foundations have been found by a research team from Oxford Archaeology. The foundations were found near Oxford city centre, a place that's been occupied continuously since the 11th century. But how did colleges work in the 1400s? St. Mary's was built around the same time as the Lincoln and Magdalen colleges, all of them strange combinations of learning houses and religious buildings. College learning was reserved for those who were devout as well. Construction on St. Mary's was slow. It wasn't until the early part of the 16th century that it received enough funding to become a true college. By the 1530s, it had a 2-story library, a chapel, and its own college kitchens. Shortly after 1535, the college was closed. 5 years later, it had fallen into ruin and was plundered for building materials. It was around this time that the college vanished from the records. Archaeologists believe it was taken apart and its salvaged pieces used in the building of a nearby church tower. 600 years later, its ruins were found by archaeologists who excavated the site prior to the construction of student housing for Brasenose College. Even after all of these centuries, this site is still a place for education. Number 3. Ancient figurine. In Germany, a truck driver found a bronze statuette at the bottom of the Tolense River in 2020. It's one of only 13 bronze statuettes found in the region since 1840. Archaeologists believe it may have been part of an early weight system used by Scandinavians thousands of years ago. Either that, or it was a mysterious object of worship, perhaps depicting an unknown deity. Archaeologists aren't sure exactly what it was. By far, the strangest part of the whole thing is that the artifact was discovered by a truck driver. He was snorkeling during some time off in the marshy streams of the river when he made the discovery. He pulled the bronze figurine, about 6 inches tall, out of the muddy peat. The statuette has a head shaped like an egg, looped arms, and a really long nose. It's also depicted with a belt and a neck ring. Thomas Terberger from the Lower Saxony State Office says the artifact is an archaeological riddle. No one knows what it was, how it got into the river, or what it was used for. But this hasn't been the only remarkable thing to come out of the swamp. There have been the skeletons of horses found, military artifacts, and the remains of over 140 people who all died from blunt force trauma. Every single one of these mysterious finds has been traced to roughly 1250 BC. The suggestion is that something very violent happened here in a single day. Archaeologists don't know what happened, nor who was involved, but they do agree this is probably the oldest battle site in all of Europe. Number 2. Ancient turkey blanket. The great ancestors of the Pueblo Indians, including the Hopi, Rio Grande Pueblos, and the Zuni, made some remarkably comfortable blankets. Archaeologists recently discovered a blanket made from around 11,000 turkey feathers in the American Southwest. The team from Washington State University analyzed the blanket and determined it to be over 800 years old. Still curious, they analyzed it even further to see just how it was made in the first place. What they discovered was that thousands of body feathers from turkeys were wrapped around 200 yards of yucca fiber cord to make the blanket. It took the feathers from between 4 and 10 turkeys to accomplish this. But what's even more interesting is that the ancient Puebloans didn't have to kill any animals to make the thousands of turkey blankets that would have been in circulation. The researchers found that they had probably harvested the feathers when the birds were naturally molting. This would have given them a sustainable collection of feathers throughout the year to create as many blankets as they wanted. This also explains the extreme reverence for turkeys still evident today in the Pueblo dances and rituals. In the 1200s, they used turkeys for everything. It wasn't until the 1600s that turkeys began to fall out of fashion. But before the Europeans arrived, turkeys were pretty much the only domesticated animal in North America. Number 1. A terrible shipwreck. Researchers with the Alabama Historical Commission have authenticated and confirmed the discovery of the last known slave ship active in the United States. Over 150 years ago, the Clotilda was bringing slaves ripped from their homeland in Benin, West Africa, to Alabama in the United States. Even after the United States of America banned the importation of slaves from Africa in the year 1808, demand continued to boom. The cotton trade was in full swing, and Alabama plantation owners weren't interested in obeying the law. They wanted slave labor to work their plantations no matter what the cost. In 1860, way after slavery importation had been outlawed, the Clotilda sailed from Mobile to what was then the Kingdom of Dahomey. Captain William Foster was in charge of the mission. He brought back a group of Africans that had been captured by a warring tribe. Captain Foster snuck the ship into Mobile Bay at night and up the river. He kept some slaves for himself and handed the rest over to a plantation owner. To get rid of the evidence, Captain Foster had the Clotilda moved upstream, burned, and sunk to the bottom of the river. After the Civil War in 1865, the Clotilda survivors tried to return to Africa but couldn't afford it, so they created a new town called Africatown. Their descendants grew up hearing about the ship and their homeland and wanted to prove the stories were true. Several organizations, including Search Inc. and the Smithsonian, came together to send archaeologists and divers to look for the ship for years. As the Smithsonian curator said, it's not just a search for a ship, but a search to find the history and identity of all the people who were brought against their will. Finally, after several decades, the ship was finally discovered at the bottom of the Mobile River. Thanks for watching! Remember to hit that subscribe button and come back soon for more videos about archaeological discoveries. See you next time! Bye!